Now we're going to start with the Z-axis, and to avoid going into way too much detail here, we'll just take a quick look at what you're building up. You've got the NEMA 17 motor, you've got the 1.5" aluminum spacers, and those are bolted together with the three M3x45mm socket cap screws. You want to get that on there nice and firm. You'll also put on the flex coupler, which has got the clamp and also the set screw. You'll want to line that set screw with the flat on the motor rod, and that should be on there tight enough that it doesn't go anywhere. Once you have that, you'll use the 3 of the self-tapping screws and attach this threaded rod plate to the actual Z-axis. The Z-axis is a 20x60 V-slot aluminum. This will be the shorter one in the pack. Now from there, you'll want to actually flip this over and grab 4 of your T-nuts, and you'll want to insert these so that the flush side is down, and on the 2 outer tracks of the V-slot you'll want to insert 2 T-nuts. These will actually be for the router mount. Doesn't really matter where they end up right now, we'll move those around later. So now that we have this built up, we'll set this aside and actually bring in our X-axis gantry plates here. So now you'll want to take your threaded rod and insert through this Acme nut block. And it should be fairly easy to turn in there. And you'll want to set this to about halfway down the rod. So we'll go about there. And again, this should still move fairly freely side to side. We'll come back and adjust that. So then you'll want to take your lock collar and your bearing. Lock collar goes on first, followed by the bearing. Now we've got the threaded rod seated down there about halfway. You want to take your Z-axis assembly so far and make sure those T-nuts don't fall out, which I guess you could insert those later actually. But we'll just work this into the wheels here. Turn this over on its side, and you want to make sure that hopefully this detail's coming out, but you'll actually push this through until the threaded rod is seated in this flex coupler. And you can rotate that around and tighten up that coupler. So you'll want to do the clamp and also the set screw on that to make sure that it's holding the rod in place where it needs to be. You'll also want to make sure that that flex coupler stays fairly square in there. They kind of have a tendency to twist around if you tighten them too far. Now that that's in, we can go ahead and seat this bearing. Into the threaded rod plate. There it goes. Once that bearing seats, you can go ahead and lock down the slot collar. Now we'll take the other end of this axis, and you'll want to do the same thing, lock collar first, followed by bearing, and then we'll take the second threaded rod plate and with the recess towards all the motors here, we'll attach this down here. And that'll be done with 3 of these self-tapping screws. And you want to leave this so you can move this plate a little bit, as we're going to be adjusting that, just kind of fine-tuning everything here in a second. So once that plate's on there, you drop this back down, seat your bearing, and lock down that lock collar. Make sure that lock collar is pushed down as far as you can get it. That way there's a little pressure on the rod. That'll just help keep everything square. And now we've got the Z-axis on the X-axis gantry. These wheels are fairly nice and snug. They'll still spin out if you try them by hand. Now the last thing to do is to actually adjust these threaded rod plates so that the threaded rod is square all the way through there. Like if you look at this, not sure if you can see it, but we actually have the threaded rod is not parallel with the Z-axis. It's actually cutting down a little bit towards the left side to the bottom of this gantry. So we're actually going to drop this top plate down just a little bit and kind of square out this rod. So if you haven't tightened these down, they should move fairly easily, and you can just set these to the point where you've got the threaded rod nice and parallel with the Z-axis V-slot. And once you get it somewhere that you're mostly happy with it, you can start locking it down. This does take a little bit of tuning, but is worth the extra time. And there you have it. The Z-axis now on the X-axis. Everything is ready to go there, and you should be able to rotate this flex coupling and move the Z-axis. So everything looks good there. And you'll also want to go in and adjust the spacing on these V wheels. So you'll see this one's a little loose, so we'll kind of adjust the eccentric there. The idea is that you want to move these so they pinch that V-slot. So we'll just go in and change a few of these just a little bit, just to get them where we want them. That actually should do it. And now we'll go back, and the last thing to do is tighten up these 2 bolts on the back end here that will go down through the Acme block. So now that everything's centered and happy, we've got our wheels attached, everything's making good contact, and we've got nice smooth motion here. The rod is parallel, life looks good. And that is it for the Z-axis and the X-axis. So We've now got the Z-axis on the X-axis gantry plates. We've got the Y-axis gantry plates built up. So the next step is to actually start assembling the Y-axis.